So DryFly was the first craft distillery in the state of Washington since Prohibition. Don Poffenroth and Ken Fleshman are the original founders, so they were fly fishing buddies. They were on the river, they were always trying to think of what they wanted to do next, kind of hit corporate burnout, so to speak. They started doing some research in distilling and realized there hadn't been a distillery in the state. And started DryFly back in 2007. Started with vodka and gin, and then added the wheat whiskey the following year, and then are now slowly starting to create more whiskeys. It's very rare for a guy like us to actually source local grain, create our own mash, ferment it, and actually produce all of our own alcohol. So we start with locally sourced grain. We mill it through this mill, turn it into a heavy flour, it's blown into this tank. There's hot water. We basically cook the grain for about 5 hours, break it down to a fermentable sugar. When we're done with this, we'll essentially add a bucket of yeast and then pump it over to a fermenter. It'll sit in there for 6 days. Yeast will eat sugar and produce two things. One is CO2 and one is alcohol. So the CO2 you can see bubbling off in all of these little side buckets. That just means that yeast is eating sugar, it's creating alcohol. So after 6 days of sitting in these tanks, we pump it over to Carl Jr. down here. The big difference between us and brewing is we ferment on the grain. So we leave the grain intact, we don't separate it out during fermentation. So what we do in this initial distillation is we separate the alcohol from the grain. We bring this to a boil, it'll vaporize, it'll go up through the column, it comes out this little spout right here and it gets collected in this tank. And at that point, if we're making vodka and gin, we take it over to this still over here. And this time we're going to send it through this 25-foot high column. In that column there's 21 plates. There's a plate basically at each little window, and that's going to separate out alcohol for us. So as the vapor makes its way up the column, it basically loses anything heavy. So water, organics, heavier alcohols, oils, those are all going to fall down that column and back into the still. What we're really looking for is ethyl alcohol. What surrounds ethyl alcohol is the best tasting part of that run. It's the cleanest. The more of that run that we take, the cleaner our product is going to be and the better it tastes. We're going to be bottling up some vodka today. Everything's done by hand. We have 12 to 15 volunteers come in twice a week. Everything that we bottle, everything that we've bottled for the last 4 years has been put together by a group of volunteers from Spokane. But they'll walk out with some free lunch, a free hat or shirt, thank you, and get a little sweat equity in the brand too. Okay, so this is our barrel room. We have over 250 barrels in here right now. This is all wheat whiskey, so this is our signature whiskey. It's the first 100% wheat whiskey made in the US since Prohibition. This middle column is some specialty whiskey for us. So the white fly is bourbon. Bourbon has to be made from at least 51% corn. Our bourbon we barrel aged for 3 years. We've had one release of bourbon, that was last July. We released it and sold out in just a matter of hours. The green fly is kind of a wheat rye hybrid grain. It's a new whiskey we're developing. We haven't released any of that. That particular grain no one has ever made whiskey from before, so that's going to be over 2 years old. That'll be released this holiday season. This green D with the Irish with the clover, it's an Irish style whiskey we're making with a local farmer, so it's his grain, it's his recipe. We're making it for him, we're kind of collaborating on it, so that'll be a lot of fun.